Ever since the beginning of the server, there has always been conspiracy about TBTT, about how TBTT is a CAI social experiment or a Mossad research on weaponized autism. Obviously, these are all just memes. But are they? Well, what my research found is actually disturbing. TBTT is not just eerily similar to some social experiment done in the past, but also arrives to the same conclusion. So buckle up, because this video will be a journey.
20 seconds and counting. T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
First and foremost, for those that don't know, a social experiment is a simulation of a certain situation involving people for the sake of scientific research and insight. There were many experiments done over the years, but all of them have one thing in common. The participants must not be aware of the experiment, or at least they must not be aware of the true purpose of it, because otherwise their behavior and pattern might not be genuine, and well, that destroys the purpose of doing the experiment in the first place. In order for the experiment to work, the participants must only receive the necessary information. It is also recommended that researcher to have as little interaction as possible during the experiment to avoid interference. During my own research on this topic, one particular experiment called my attention: the Stanford prison experiment. You might have heard about it before, but in case you haven't, I will give you a quick rundown.
These are not prisoners, and this is not a prison. They are college students, and they were part of an astonishing experiment. On a quiet Sunday morning in August, the Palo Alto police swept through the dorms and student housing areas of Stanford University. The police were told to duplicate every detail of an actual arrest. Much to the surprise of neighbors and onlookers, each student was formally charged with a serious crime and treated as a dangerous criminal.
Okay, you want to get in the car, please, sir? I want to get in the car.
At the police station, students were booked and fingerprinted. Then, each was blindfolded and taken to the basement of the psychology building. There, they were led to a simulated prison block consisting of 3 small cells, a narrow hallway, and a closet designed for solitary confinement. This would be their entire world for 2 weeks. First, the prisoners were stripped and forced to stand naked while they were deloused with a spray. Later, they were given a uniform which was simply a dress with a number on the front. Instead of shaving their heads, the prisoners were given tight stocking caps to cover their hair. They were put in their cells and told to sit in absolute silence. The process of humiliation had begun.
In 1971, Professor Philip Zimbardo managed to get a group of 24 volunteers for an experiment. The social experiment consisted basically in put two groups of selected volunteers together under different roles, guards and prisoners. They would have to live together in a fake prison for 2 weeks. Both roles were given different instructions on how to act and different uniforms. Zimbardo made it look like the prisoners were the one being experimented, but the truth is that the guards were the ones being observed. The idea of the experiment was to see if, when given power over others and anonymity, normal people could act cruel or sadistic. The prisoners were also not addressed by their name, but rather by numbers, further dehumanizing them at the eyes of the guards. The experiment was based on the Deindividuation theory, which argues that individuals in a cohesive group tend to lose their personal identity, consciousness, sense of responsibility, fueling the emergence of antisocial impulses. Well, Zimbardo had planned for the experiment to last 2 weeks, but after only 6 days, he was forced to shut down the whole thing. The results of the experiment shocked the scientific community and raised more questions than answers, including about the legitimacy of the experiment itself. Other psychologists argued that by giving different roles and instructions, Zimbardo gave the guards what is called demand characteristics. It basically means that the participants form an interpretation of the experiment's purpose and unconsciously change their behavior to fit that interpretation. This means that the guards behaved aggressively because they felt that it was expected of them to do so. That sort of pressure can affect the legitimacy of their behavior. Others also argue that the prison setting had a natural tendency to attract volunteers with authoritarian tendencies. For this and many other reasons, it remains one of the most controversial social experiments in scientific history. It raised awareness for more ethical experiments as well. After all, these were all real people and not rats in a lab. Okay, Sato, but what does this have to do with 2B2T? Actually, everything. If you stop to think about it, the server has pretty much every ingredient from the Stanford prison experiment. You have anonymity or absence of consequence for your actions. You have power over others. You have cohesive groups. 2B2T is an environment that invites players to lose their sense of responsibility, to lose their identity and build a new one. I guess this means that the server is a social experiment, right? No. Even if 2B2T indeed has the same elements of Zimbardo's experiment, it also has the same flaws. The fact that it's an anarchy server, which has a natural tendency to attract players who are inclined to violence and cheating, both the game and others. What about demand characteristics? Does 2B2T has that? Well, yes. We have that too. Incursions are a prime example of that. During the event, you are expected to act in a certain way. You are expected to kill new players at spawn. Even if you don't normally act that way, you will do it to gain social acceptance from the other members. The same can be said about faction dynamics. You will do whatever you have to do to gain the social acceptance of your faction. The reputation of the server itself also demands you to behave differently than what you would do in real life. You are more careful when trusting others on 2B2T. In fact, I strongly believe that 2B2T not just proves that the experiment was flawed, but also that humans have a natural tendency for kindness, even in an environment that is saturated by elements that would lead you to do otherwise. As players, we are constantly faced by moral choices when we play. Let me tell you about the day Valkyria was split in two. I wasn't playing when Valkyria was abandoned again after the second incursion. Jack the Ripper took upon himself the responsibility to then lead the base members to somewhere safe, which is the same thing I would do if I was online. However, he had different plans on what to do next. When I returned to the P2T, I immediately met up with some of them, but I know that some of those base members were missing, and as I talked with Jack, he explained me why. He only led those members he liked. He was telling me about how he wanted to bring those players to his base in the millions, the famous land of North. Thanks to horses, he could lead them there safely and faster to the Netherworld at a time. But the window of how long this was possible was closing, because it would soon be patched at a time. He extended the invite for me as well, but I refused. Why I refused? Well, because we had different experiences. For being put in a leadership position, I had to make connections with everyone in the base. I was friends with everybody. And the plan he was proposing would pretty much abandon 15 people to their own luck. What would be my answer if they asked me why they were left behind? Oh, because Jack didn't like you, so I couldn't do it. It didn't seem moral to me. From Jack's perspective, this seemed reasonable, and I can understand why. After all, it's his base, so it's his prerogative on who he wants to invite or not. But at the time, I got a little upset, because he was considering leaving people who considered him a friend, and he was considering leaving them behind. 7 players went with him, but most of the people stayed behind. I left the players to decide what they wanted to do, and I just moved on to make another base where I could receive those who wish to stay. If this little story has a lesson, is that your decisions will be ultimately decided by your individual personality. Sure, the environment plays a role, yes, obviously. But even so, you can still grasp on your definition on what is right or wrong. You can still feel empathy towards others, even if it is through Minecraft. And there are many other stories like this one out there. Stories of long friendships, of random acts of kindness, of wholesomeness. I must have probably based with more than 100 people by now. And I repeat, only 4 of them, 4 players, gave me and others any sort of trouble. Enough to lead to a base destruction. And if you're not convinced yet, just know that the Stanford experiment was done again under more ethical standards and with no demand characteristics. And the results were that when a group was given power over another in anonymity, people would rather focus on their own group and increase the bond of relationships than waste time punishing another one. Humans are not inherently cruel or sadistic. We prefer to help than to hurt. We prefer to make friends than enemies. We prefer the company of others and bond with them. Jack and I are still great friends. He has a genuine appreciation for the time we spent together. So much that he would name his first end base as a homage to the group we were all part of.